Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of our podcast called Between Two Kets. My name is Isaac DeVlute. I work at Xanadu as a quantum educator. I'll be active on the YouTube here a lot, but you'll also see me in other places like our discussion forum, answering your questions, and many other things. The Between Two Kets podcast is our chance to ask the leading people in quantum programming about their origin story and how they got to where they are today. There's also some fun questions too that we sprinkle in here and there. Our first guest was Nathan Killoran. He's a Canadian scientist who's the CTO of software at Xanadu, but you probably know him best for his pioneering work in quantum machine learning, with papers like Quantum Machine Learning in Feature Hilbert Spaces, Evaluating Analytic Gradients on Quantum Hardware, and many, many more. But you also probably know him from being a founding member of PennyLane, which is our quantum programming software package. So I know Nathan because I work with him. We chat here and there and joke around a bit. We know each other decently well, but it was nice to hear his origin story and kind of figure out what made him who he is today. Nathan's had a pretty interesting academic journey. He bounced around a little bit in southwestern Ontario and Canada, but we went even further back into his history in this video, so I definitely encourage you to watch the whole thing. Leave a comment with questions for Nathan if you have any, and enjoy the podcast. Cheers. Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of Between Two Kets, the podcast where we take a peek behind the curtain at the biggest names in the quantum programming community. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you know...
Where's the button? We got to point to it.
What? Oh.
Hit that subscriber bell.
Make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you know when these episodes drop. But most importantly, just sit back and enjoy these conversations. Let's get to our first guest, which is none other than Nathan Killoran. He is the CTO of software at Xanadu. Nathan's been all over the place in his academic career. You probably know him best from his work here at Xanadu, pioneering quantum machine learning and being one of the founding members of PennyLane. We'll talk about his origin story and all of his academic adventures in this interview. So let's just get right to it. Nathan, welcome.
Super excited to be here. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, awesome. So how you doing today? Pretty hot in Toronto. Like I was outside not too long ago.
I like it. I like the heat.
You know what? Like, I don't mind the heat either. I used to spend summers in the South. And,
the Deep South?
The Deep South, yeah, Louisiana. And yeah, it gets like absurdly humid and hot here. So like when there's days like this, it kind of reminds me of that. So it's not too bad. Like, kind of enjoy it. But I guess when you're wearing jeans, no matter what, and it's hot, it's not a good plan.
The worst part is you're wearing summer appropriate clothing and you enter an office building and you have to put your parka on because it's so damn cold with the air conditioning.
Yeah. It's like that scene in Anchorman where it's like milk is a bad choice. Jeans are always a bad choice in the summer. But anyway, it's just what is what it is, right? Okay, so you're the first guest of Between Two Kets. How does that feel?
Hopefully not the last.
Could you imagine? Just it's done here.
Pilots,
folks.
no, unsuccessful, can it?
You've been at Xanadu since like day one. So like, I guess my question is, I work here too. So, I have a good idea for probably what you find to be the most enjoyable things at Xanadu. But like, what did you find the most enjoyable about working at Xanadu from like day one to like now? So like, what drove you to get to work when PennyLane was starting? Xanadu was just becoming a thing with like a handful of employees versus now. Yeah.
I mean, it's always been a great place to work. No matter what the actual work is, the environment is great colleagues, great humor in the office, really fun. But it's interesting the way you asked the question. What drove you in those early days? What drives me now is actually built out of what we started off, which was nothing, right? So in those early days, this is 2017 when I first joined, so 6 years ago almost. There was nothing. The company was in stealth. It had $2 million in the bank, a few employees, crazy people who didn't know what they were getting into, a few people committed, and that was it. There was no products, no market, no brand, no technology, nothing. And what I've always liked and what I always tell people is that I like being able to, as an individual, have an impact, not just in a company, but in an entire like technological space. So the ideas that we thought were interesting and useful in those early days, we pushed on them. And, fortunately for us, the community seems to have, taken on that same perspective. They seem to agree with us. That's what we thought was important is important. And they like what we've done. And they have given us that mandate to continue doing it. So that's always the thing I like most about working here is being able to have impact and to see that impact. So now I'm just thinking, what's the next idea? What's the next thing that we can push? We're still got a long way to go. How can we have an impact on making quantum computers useful and available to people everywhere?
I guess my next question is, well, like kind of the opposite end of that. This is you now. I mean, were you always kind of like that as a kid? Like, well, I guess what was the first thing that you really got into? Was it science? Was it something else? Like,
I'm embarrassed to admit that when I was a kid, I was a smart kid, but I was lazy. I was into TV and video games, going to the convenience store and getting candy, this kind of stuff. I didn't have very big ambition as a child. I think it's fair enough. Kids should be kids, right? I remember in elementary school, we had science fairs every year. And one year I just didn't make a science fair project because I didn't care. And so I was the only kid who showed up with no science fair projects.
that's hilarious.
So yeah, now I'm a professional scientist, and I'm hoping to, inspire the next generation of scientists. But you got to start with modest beginnings, I guess.
For me, when I was a kid, like before I found physics and science in general, like it was music. Like I was hell-bent on, like I thought up until pretty much grade 11 that I was going to be
a rock star.
Yeah. And then I remember taking grade 11 physics. My teacher, Mr. Greason, if you're watching this, Mr. Greason, hi. It was like a kinematics test, like intro to kinematics, like throwing a ball and calculating its velocity, position, all that stuff.
And you're like, forget music. This is what I want to do.
Forget music. I want to calculate projectiles. Yeah. No. So I remember doing really well on that test. And I was just like, wow, like it was kind of liberating to, solve something complicated on pen and paper, like to kind of have that like control over life or nature. Before that, it was total opposite. Like, was it kind of the same for you, or were you just kind of always destined to be a scientist?
The inklings were probably there. As I said, I was pretty lazy. I was into like Simpsons and Star Trek: The Next Generation and things like this. So I had that bit of that geek mindset, I guess, but never really dug too deep into the science side of things. It was kind of more of like a side interest amongst many other interests. I think I tried to read A Brief History of Time when I was in grade 7, just for like the bragging rights, but I didn't make it through it.
That's Stephen Hawking, right?
Stephen Hawking.
Yeah. Okay.
I did read some other book by Kip Thorne when I was in like grade 12, which is a bit later. I managed to make it through that whole book, Black Holes and Time Warps, I think, or something like that. Okay. But for me, I coasted through school. I was always good at science and mathy stuff, but it wasn't like I knew I was going to be a scientist. I remember telling one time I told my grandma, I'm going to be an astrophysicist. I don't know why. It just, came to me, and I said that, and my parents, my family, they thought this was hilarious. I didn't become an astrophysicist, so I became a quantum physicist instead. Pretty close. Still had the physicist
Pretty close.
part. Yeah.
I'd say it's pretty close.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think it was in high school, maybe a similar situation to you, where I was pretty good at math, but I wasn't really trying very hard. And then in grade 12, physics, as you get actual physics class. Before that, I wasn't too into science, but then I took a physics class, and I was like, this is the stuff. This is cool. I like this stuff, and I'm good at it.
Yeah. So I guess that propelled you to university to like study physics. Like,
that's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So
I remember sitting in the halls of high school, and it was grade 12, and I was like, you know what? I better think about whether I want to go to university or not. Okay, I think I do. Well, if I go to university, I better start actually trying in my classes and get good grades and learn the subject rather than just getting a passing grade.
You went to University of Toronto for your undergrad?
I've had a little bit of a journey. So I went to the University of Guelph for undergrad.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah.
And then I went to the University of Toronto for a master's degree in pure math. And then I went to the University of Waterloo. So it was kind of a triangle here in Southern Ontario.
Right.
I did my PhD in Waterloo. So those are the 3 stops along the way.
When was this about? This is like early 2000, like mid 2000s kind of thing?
So I started undergrad in 2001, and I finished my PhD in 2012.
Okay.
And there was a few like backpacking trips in between.
Sure. So like at that point though, like I know quantum computing kind of, boomed pretty hard in the 90s. So when you were in university studying physics, like what did you actually think you were going to do with it?
I had the sense I wanted to work in industry. I think that was clear to me. Starting university, I thought, oh yeah, I'll be a professor. I think most people probably think that when they start.
Yeah.
At some point along the way, they see the signals and they recognize that there's alternate career paths available. So I think by the time I went to grad school, I was starting to crystallize in my head that I would prefer industry, but I still wanted to do science. So I didn't want to like go and get a PhD and then work at a bank or something. I still wanted to find a way to do science, and ideally the science I was trained to do. So it was a bit of a risk actually when I went to my PhD. I had two options. I could go to Waterloo and study quantum computing. It was a great place to study quantum computing. And it had the benefit that this is some obvious technological development that could take place in the future, and we could potentially have industry careers available for someone trained in this area. Or I could study like astrophysics or string theory or general relativity, something kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, much more sciencey, less industrially applicable. And I guess, the choice that I made was quantum computing, and I'm happy I made it. And when I graduated from my PhD, those jobs weren't available. There was no significant quantum computing industry like there is today.
Yeah.
People who are graduating today might experience something quite different. But when I graduated, definitely it was like, well, what do I do now? Do I stick with it and just hold out until those positions do become available, till that industry does take off, or do I pivot to something else? And fortunately, the timelines align such that right around the time where I was getting too old to be indecisive, the industry started to appear.
Yeah. On the so I started this by saying probably the thing you're most known for is the stuff you did when you were finished your PhD, most notably like pioneering work in quantum machine learning, and then after that came PennyLane. How did you get into machine learning? Like, how did you make the tie between quantum computing and quantum machine learning? And I guess we can segue into PennyLane. Like, how did you what were the ideas originally to like make PennyLane like the differentiable programming, a quantum programming language?
So, in fact, I was thinking about careers in industries, as I told you, and I would say machine learning started to boom right when I finished my PhD. It wasn't really on my radar, but I would say the big bang in machine learning came in around 2012 with AlexNet, and from there it's kind of grown like crazy. It started to appear on my radar shortly after, maybe a couple of years after that, when I was thinking about what are natural career paths for a physicist. But actually, originally I had the idea of using physics for quantum biology, and that somehow there would be like commercial applications of using quantum technologies for biologically relevant problems or biologically inspired problems. The big one being things like solar cells. Can we take quantum physics and use the ideas there to make more efficient solar cells? And you can, but it's probably very expensive to do that. One of the things about solar cells is you need them to be cheap, you need them to be widely available, easily manufacturable. And so the more fancy stuff you put in them, maybe you get some efficiency gains, but if it's very expensive, no one's going to use it. So that kind of petered out. I don't think that field took off the way I expected it to, the quantum biology technology fields. Interestingly, I was at a quantum biology conference when I first met Maria, who works for us, and we've worked together for years in the quantum machine learning field. Mm-hmm. She was a PhD student, and this is a quantum biology conference, and she was there presenting something about like quantum neurons or something like this. So even in those days, there was no such thing as quantum machine learning, and she was kind of starting to like tickle at the edges of the connectivity of those ideas, but it was phrased as a biological thing instead.
Interesting. Okay.
So I remember having quite a nice conversation with her at this conference, and it was on my radar to do machine learning and quantum, and I kind of gravitated, cycled between the two over time. I actually did a year postdoc where I didn't even check up on what was happening in quantum for a whole year. I just did pure machine learning. Mm. And then right at the end of that, Xanadu reached out to me and they're like, hey, we want to do something with quantum machine learning. You've got the great background for this.
Sure.
And the rest is history from there.
The rest is history. Yeah.
And
cool.
That all inspired that whole background, my exposure to machine learning on the day-to-day level, working deeply in the research field allowed me to kind of connect together the ideas. That was the inspiration for PennyLane, as I saw people using tools like TensorFlow and PyTorch in the machine learning field, I got to see how useful they were. And I thought, we can port some of these ideas over to quantum, because the people in quantum weren't quite seeing it the same way. But because I had spent some time not thinking about quantum, that allowed me to kind of see the connectivity between the two fields.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Like, you take a break from something, you kind of turn off and on again kind of thing. Like, you come back to it, you get a new perspective based on what you've learned in the interim. And okay, yeah, I can see that happening. Cool.
I saw some advice once where someone said it's extremely difficult, extremely hard to be top of the field in any field because there's so much competition. You have to be super dedicated.
Yep.
But if you can get pretty good at two fields and you can work at the interface between those two fields, you can make a huge career out of that. So finding two fields that align and kind of becoming semi-expert on both of them and seeing how they connect to each other, that can be very, very fruitful. And that seems to be how my career developed.
Nice. I guess next question is like, is there a paper that you're like the most proud of that is like the marker in your mind that, this is when like my path as a quantum programmer really just like turned to that direction?
I won't say I'm embarrassed by my PhD papers, but they're not like the most advanced work. They're more niche. I would say the time where I knew I was hitting my stride as a scientist was during my postdoc. I had a paper there where I did this really cool idea about how you could take the notion of identical particles in physics, and there was this kind of like hidden entanglement that was there. If you describe it mathematically, it looks like these particles are entangled, but it was always considered very fictitious because it's just a mathematical artifact, and this was not some like actual extractable entanglement that you could do anything with. I think it was called a bunch of names, but I think fuzzy bunny entanglement was one of the names that was
fuzzy bunny entanglement.
Yeah. Okay. So there had been this folklore that had said in like mathematically it looks like these particles which obey this exchange symmetry look like they're entangled, but really it's just because you're using the wrong representation. There's no entanglement there. It's non-physical.
Interesting.
And I had an idea and a paper where I basically said like, maybe there's some merit to this idea. Maybe it doesn't look like this is real entanglement, but we can turn it into real entanglement. And turns out you can. And there was a lot of like convincing needed to do people. My supervisor, when I was a postdoc, actually, he told me to shame people a little bit, to point out in the paper like who had proposed this alternative perspective, who had derided this idea in the past, just to draw a distinction between what we're proposing. So that was really cool. It was where it was like, here's an idea. This has nothing to do with really quantum programming, quantum machine learning, or anything like that. But here's an idea that had laid dormant in the field, and people had actually like thought the opposite. And I was able to be that like smart aleck guy who came along and said, hey, actually, if you do it this way and this way and this way, you can actually make real entanglement here. So that was a nice moment for me.
What are you currently working on? And like, I guess what can we expect from you? Like, is there something coming in the future? Like,
you want me to plug my new stuff?
Drop a little salt, like.
Yeah. I'm fortunate right now, even though I've got a very leadership position at the company, to still be active on research projects with the team and to be working with amazing team. So I'm not involved in every project, but the ones that I'm currently involved on are with some very strong students that we have working with us. And the general idea is finding ways to represent interesting structures within quantum circuits. So how to embed different kinds of manifolds, different kinds of problems into the unitary gate structure of quantum circuits, and then how to optimize those things. So imagine you've got the entire space of places that a circuit could visit, the entire Hilbert space. You might only want to visit certain subsets of that, just for efficiency's sake. You need a huge number of parameters to visit every possible state. And in fact, your problem doesn't live on every possible direction, but it's confined to some interesting subset. So how can you take that knowledge and embed it into the structure of the quantum circuit? This is a very fruitful idea from classical machine learning, where things like convolutions allow you to show very strong performance, and actually by reducing your parameter counts. And the trick there is you're recognizing some inherent symmetry and some inherent structure to the problem, and you're encoding that into your model by hand. You're still leaving it flexible to learn something, but you're not requiring it to learn absolutely everything about the world. So really a lot of research we're doing right now is how to embed these interesting structures that a practitioner might have in mind, embed them into a circuit so that when you're learning, when you're traversing this base of states, you're always doing it in an efficient and a smart way that's keeping kind of on point with what you want to do.
Cool. Okay. Well, everybody keep their eyes peeled for that. That sounds like a pretty dense read, but a pretty,
I'm working on some more like Twitter style content as well.
Right. Okay.
My life is split between the two.
Right. Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, now let's get into some fun questions. I think
those weren't the fun ones.
Oh, no. These are even more fun. Okay. Funner. We're going to call this segment Random Sampling. So I got some questions right here that I'm just going to read off of.
Nice.
Okay, so here we go. These are supposed to be kind of rapid fire questions, like pretty short answers. So let's cook through them. So if any of you know Nathan on GitHub, he is this odd person named Kuninol guy. C-O-9-O-L-G-U-Y. Like the 9 is in between the two O's in cool. So like why Kuninol guy?
It was a typo and I just went with it because that username is always available.
Nice. That's actually awesome. Okay. Is there a piece of software that does something that you wish existed but currently doesn't? And what Beatles song would you give it?
Beatles song that's easy. Right now, learning to play Norwegian Wood, so that's what I would call it.
Okay.
Software that I wish existed, and maybe I'm going to throw a bit shade on some of our competitors here because some people are trying to make the software.
Okay.
But I think it's too early.
Okay.
I do want us to be at that stage where quantum programmers don't have to think on the level of gates and qubits, but they're thinking about higher levels. I think we're not at a stage yet where we can automate that for them, where we have all the machinery in place, and so it still requires them to get in the guts of the machine. Okay. But that would be, that's what we're reaching towards. That's where we're evolving things towards, and I'm,
sweet.
I want that to happen.
Awesome. Cool. We have a presence on Twitch every year for our big hackathon called QHack. We host that on Twitch, so it's live streamed and everything like that. So, to boot with that, we're like big on Twitch emotes, just not Twitch emotes, even just internally. We do converse in emojis and all that sort of stuff. But, Twitch has a very unique set of emojis. What is your favorite Twitch emoji? And, let's see an impression.
I got a few favorites, but the impression will always look the same for all of them. So Komodo hype is my favorite.
Okay. Awesome.
But I think PogChamp, Oh My Dog, they're pretty much a similar expression.
Oh My Dog is probably my favorite. Like, nice.
I knew it.
Yeah, that's just awesome. Most famous person you've ever met?
Interesting. Actually, my boss, Christian, was just telling me that he met Edward Norton last week. I haven't met anyone who's a Hollywood celebrity.
Okay.
If I had to say scientific famous people, right. I've met Yoshua Bengio. I've had a call with him. I talked to him. And I once sat next to Jeff Hinton in a talk.
Okay.
He probably didn't know I was there, but he sat in the chair next to me.
Interesting. Mac and cheese. Maybe it's not called mac and cheese for everybody in the world, but basically it's like a box of noodles with like a pre-formulated cheese powder that you just cook over on the stove. It's like a Canadian
You make it sound
staple.
so delicious.
It's so good. This is honestly a controversy for me. Would you eat mac and cheese with a fork or a spoon?
I mean, I wouldn't. I would eat mac and cheese with my bare hands if I could. But fork is my go-to.
Fork. There's actually a study about this that says that there's like a critical age where you stop using a spoon and you go to a fork. And around that age, like the age is around a toddler. So if you eat mac and cheese with a spoon, just know that. Okay, last question. This is probably the most controversial, even though there's arguably an answer for it, but I don't think there is. You've seen the Titanic. Could Jack fit on the door and survive?
You know what? It always bothered me when I was watching the movie, like, why doesn't he just get up there? But thinking about it as an adult, like, it would be pretty unwieldy. It wouldn't sink, but it would be hard to get two people like steady on there. So it's a tough call.
I think my will to survive would just be like, I'm gonna try. I don't think he even tried. Really,
he probably didn't want to survive. He was like, I can't top that.
So that'll be it for episode 1 of Between Two Kets. Please subscribe, like this video, share it with your friends. But Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone watching, thank you for watching and have a great day. Cheers. Let's get to our first guest. His name is Nathan Killoran. He's the CTO of software at Xanadu, the quantum computing company trying to make useful and available quantum computers everywhere. That I messed up the mission statement.